The stranger in the garage. The gray mist of dawn hung low over the quiet suburban neighborhood of Westbury Hills, where manicured lawns and neatly trimmed hedges signaled the structured lives of its affluent residents. However, among the sprawling homes and gleaming cars, one peculiar routine had started to draw attention. At precisely 6:30 a.m. every morning, a sleek black sedan would pull into the gravelly driveway of an abandoned garage on Cedar Lane. The garage, dilapidated and forgotten, seemed wildly out of place in the polished community. Most residents avoided it altogether, considering it a blemish on the neighborhood's image. But not Mr. Alistair Kane. Alistair Kane, the enigmatic millionaire and philanthropist, was a man of mystery, known for his towering presence, salt and pepper hair, and a gaze sharp enough to pierce steel. Kane rarely interacted with his neighbors. His presence alone commanded attention, and his sudden visits to the decrepit garage had become the talk of the town. Why would a man like him be interested in that rundown place? Whispered Helen Parker, peeking through her kitchen blinds as she watched his car disappear into the shadows of the garage. It wasn't just his visits that puzzled the neighborhood. Accompanying Kane was a young black girl, no older than 8 or 9. Her face was seldom visible, hidden under the hood of her oversized sweatshirt. Together, they would vanish into the garage for hours, leaving behind only the faint hum of a generator. One morning, Helen decided to investigate. Her curiosity had grown too large to ignore, and armed with a pair of binoculars, she stationed herself by the window. She wasn't alone in her interest. Other neighbors had begun speculating wildly. "Maybe he's hiding something illegal," said Greg Thompson, a retired lawyer with a penchant for conspiracy theories. "That place is perfect for a secret operation." "Don't be ridiculous," scoffed his wife. "It's probably a charity thing. You know he's involved in all those social programs." But Helen wasn't so sure. Something about the girl's demeanor unsettled her. The child always seemed to cling to Kane, her movements hesitant, her shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. Who was she? And what was she doing with one of the richest men in town? Determined to uncover the truth, Helen waited until Kane and the girl had disappeared inside the garage. She slipped on a coat and ventured out, careful not to draw attention. The morning air bit at her cheeks as she approached the garage, her pulse quickening with each step. She pressed her ear against the cold metal door, straining to catch any sound. At first, there was nothing but the faint hum of the generator. Then she heard voices, muffled but distinct. "It's important you understand this," Kane's deep voice echoed. "No matter what happens, you're stronger than you think." The girl's reply was too soft to hear, but Helen could sense the tension in her tone. There was a long pause, followed by the sound of something metallic scraping against the floor. Helen's heart raced. What were they doing in there? Suddenly, a dog barked in the distance, startling Helen. She stumbled back, her foot crunching against a pile of dried leaves. She froze, praying they hadn't heard her. The garage door rattled, and Helen barely had time to dart behind a nearby tree as it slid open. Kane stepped out first, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. He didn't look angry, but there was an undeniable air of suspicion in his movements. The girl followed, her hood still pulled low over her face. Kane locked the garage and walked her back to the car. As they drove away, Helen's mind raced with questions. What was he hiding? And why did he seem so protective of the girl? Determined to uncover the truth, she decided to involve someone else. Later that afternoon, she knocked on the door of her closest confidant, Sarah Bishop. Sarah, a journalist for the local newspaper, was known for her investigative instincts. Helen laid out everything she had seen and heard, her voice trembling with urgency. Sarah listened intently, her brow furrowed in thought. "This doesn't add up," Sarah said finally. "A man like Alistair Kane doesn't just vanish into an abandoned garage for no reason, especially not with a child. I'll look into it." As Sarah delved into Kane's background, she discovered snippets of a life that seemed too perfect on the surface. Born into wealth, Kane had built his empire in the tech industry before retiring early to focus on philanthropy. But there were whispers of a scandal years ago, one involving his family. His wife passed away under mysterious circumstances, Sarah revealed to Helen a few days later. There was talk of an estranged daughter, but no one could confirm it. Helen's stomach churned. Could the girl be Kane's daughter? Or was she someone else entirely? Someone in need of help? Fueled by a mix of curiosity and unease, Sarah decided to confront Kane directly. She crafted a story about wanting to write an article on his philanthropic work and requested an interview. To her surprise, he agreed. When Sarah arrived at his estate, she was struck by its grandeur. The sprawling mansion, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens, seemed a world away from the dilapidated garage on Cedar Lane. Kane greeted her warmly, but there was a guardedness in his eyes. As the interview progressed, Sarah steered the conversation toward his recent activities. "You've been spending a lot of time on Cedar Lane," she said casually. "Is it part of a new project?" Kane's expression didn't falter, but Sarah noticed the slight tightening of his jaw. "Cedar Lane is personal," he said after a pause. "It's not something I wish to discuss." Sarah pushed a little further. "Does it have anything to do with the girl who accompanies you?" For a moment, Kane's polished exterior cracked. His eyes darkened, and his voice turned cold. "I believe I've answered enough questions for today." He rose to signal the end of the interview, leaving Sarah with more questions than answers. As she drove home, she couldn't shake the feeling that Kane was hiding something far more complex than she had imagined. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the abandoned garage, Kane stood with the girl, his voice soft but firm. "You're ready," he said. "Tomorrow, we take the next step." The girl nodded, her small hands trembling. Whatever lay ahead, it was clear that both their lives were about to change. Echoes of the past. The morning came thick with the promise of rain, the clouds looming heavy and gray over Westbury Hills. Helen Parker couldn't shake the unease that had settled over her since the confrontation at the garage. The girl's face, what little she had seen of it, haunted her thoughts. There was something in her posture, a fragility that spoke volumes. Who was she? What was she running from? Or worse, what had happened to her? Meanwhile, Sarah Bishop, always persistent, had spent the night digging through public records and news archives. Kane's life, though pristine on paper, carried undercurrents of tragedy. His wife, Madeline Kane, had died in a car accident 10 years ago. The accident was ruled a result of faulty brakes, but whispers of foul play had never entirely dissipated. Then there was the estranged daughter, Alina. Sarah found only a few mentions of Alina Kane, most from years ago. A promising artist, Alina had vanished from the public eye around the same time as her mother's death. No interviews, no gallery showings, no social media presence. It was as if she had been erased. But why? That morning, Sarah decided to return to Cedar Lane, not to confront Kane directly but to observe. Armed with a pair of binoculars and a thermos of coffee, she parked a few blocks away and waited. She didn't have to wait long. At exactly 6:30 a.m., Kane's black sedan rolled into the driveway of the abandoned garage. He stepped out, wearing his usual immaculate suit, and walked to the passenger side. The girl climbed out, her hood pulled low, and they disappeared inside the garage. But this time, Sarah noticed something new. Kane carried a large duffel bag. It looked heavy, the weight of it making his movements deliberate. What was inside? As Sarah watched, the hum of the generator began. Through the faint gap at the edge of the garage door, she could see a soft glow, like the flicker of fluorescent lights. Suddenly, the sound of a car pulling up behind her snapped her out of her thoughts. A neighbor, a middle-aged man with a suspicious gaze, tapped on her window. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice laced with mistrust. Thinking quickly, Sarah forced a smile. "Oh, hi. I'm just waiting for a friend. She lives nearby." The man didn't look convinced, but nodded and walked away, muttering under his breath. Sarah exhaled slowly, her heart pounding. She realized she had been so focused on Kane that she hadn't considered how conspicuous she might appear. Back at the garage, Kane and the girl were deep in conversation. The interior was a stark contrast to its weathered exterior. Inside, it had been transformed into a makeshift studio. Blueprints and sketches covered the walls, and the duffel bag Kane had carried in now lay open, revealing tools, wires, and small mechanical parts. "Are you sure about this?" Kane asked, his voice soft but firm. The girl nodded, her face partially illuminated by the overhead light. For the first time, her features were clear, wide brown eyes filled with determination, a smattering of freckles across her nose, and an intensity that belied her age. "I have to be," she replied. "No one else can know. It's safer this way." Kane studied her for a moment before placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're brave, Alex. Braver than I ever was." The name struck Sarah like a lightning bolt. Alex? Could this be Alina? The resemblance was there, but this girl seemed much younger than Alina would be now. Still, the connection was too strong to ignore. Meanwhile, Helen couldn't resist the pull of curiosity. Against her better judgment, she returned to Cedar Lane that morning, this time under the guise of taking her dog for a walk. She timed her approach carefully, ensuring she arrived just as Kane's car pulled out of the driveway. She waited until he was out of sight before walking past the garage. It was then that she noticed something odd. The faint hum of the generator had stopped, replaced by a strange rhythmic tapping sound. Her dog, a sprightly terrier named Max, barked at the garage door, his ears perked up. "Shay, Max," Helen whispered, pulling him away. But the sound stuck with her, echoing in her mind long after she returned home. That afternoon, Sarah decided to confront Kane more directly. She waited outside his estate until his car pulled into the driveway. As he stepped out, she approached, her notepad in hand. "Mr. Kane," she called, her tone firm. "A moment of your time." Kane's expression darkened. "Ms. Bishop, I believe I made myself clear during our interview." Sarah refused to back down. "This isn't about philanthropy. It's about the girl. Who is she? And why are you hiding her?" For a moment, Kane said nothing. Then he took a step closer, his voice low and measured. "Be very careful, Ms. Bishop. There are things in this world better left alone." With that, he turned and disappeared into his mansion, leaving Sarah standing in the driveway, her heart racing. Later that night, as rain began to fall, Kane returned to the garage alone. He carried another duffel bag, this one even heavier than the last. Inside, Alex was waiting, her eyes scanning the blueprints spread out before her. "I got the parts," Kane said, placing the bag on the floor. "Are you ready?" Alex nodded, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached for a pair of gloves. "We don't have much time. If we don't finish this soon, they'll find us." "They won't," Kane assured her. "Not as long as we stick to the plan." But even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Whispers in the shadows. The storm broke that evening, drenching Westbury Hills in sheets of cold rain. The rhythmic patter of droplets against the pavement created an eerie soundtrack to the night, one that seemed to amplify the tension building in the neighborhood. For Helen Parker, the rain was both a blessing and a curse. It provided cover for her next attempt to uncover Kane's secret, but also made her venture that much more precarious. Helen had spent the better part of the day pacing her living room, replaying the events at the garage in her mind. Her instincts told her that whatever was happening, there was more than a rich man's eccentric hobby. She couldn't shake the memory of the girl's hunched figure or the strange glow emanating from the garage. Finally, as the rain cloaked the neighborhood in darkness, Helen grabbed her umbrella and set out. She kept to the shadows, her breath fogging in the chilly air. When she reached Cedar Lane, the garage loomed like a phantom against the backdrop of the storm. The hum of the generator was absent tonight, replaced by an unsettling silence. Helen crept closer, her heart pounding as she strained to see through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. Suddenly, A faint light flickered on inside, casting elongated shadows on the walls. She held her breath, her eyes fixed on the scene unfolding within. Inside the garage, Alex sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by a chaotic array of tools, wires, and circuit boards. Her small hands moved with surprising precision as she connected wires and soldered components, her brow furrowed in concentration. Beside her, Kane watched silently, his expression a mix of pride and concern. "This will work," Alex said, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "It has to." Kane crouched beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It will. And if it doesn't, we'll find another way." Alex looked up at him, her eyes brimming with determination. "There's no other way, Mr. Kane. If we don't finish this, they'll come for me. You know they will." Kane didn't respond, but the grim set of his jaw spoke volumes. He stood and walked to a nearby table, where a laptop displayed a series of schematics. The blueprints showed a device unlike anything Helen had ever seen, an intricate web of gears, wires, and glowing components that pulsed with a faint blue light. As Helen tried to make sense of what she was seeing, a loud clap of thunder startled her. She stumbled backward, her foot catching on a loose stone. The noise echoed through the night, drawing Kane's attention. He froze, his gaze snapping to the garage door. "Stay here," he told Alex, his voice low. He grabbed a flashlight and moved toward the door, his footsteps deliberate and heavy. Helen's heart raced as she scrambled to find cover. She ducked behind a pile of debris just as the garage door creaked open. Kane stepped outside, the beam of his flashlight slicing through the rain-soaked darkness. "Who's there?" he called, his voice sharp. Helen pressed herself against the cold, wet ground, willing herself to stay silent. The flashlight swept over her hiding spot, and for a terrifying moment, she thought she'd been spotted. But then Kane turned away, scanning the rest of the area before retreating back inside. Meanwhile, Sarah Bishop was piecing together a story that was growing stranger by the hour. After her tense encounter with Kane, she had returned to her office and plunged headfirst into her investigation. The more she uncovered, the more questions she had. Records showed that the abandoned garage on Cedar Lane had once been part of a larger property owned by a reclusive scientist named Dr. Elliot Mercer. Mercer had vanished nearly 2 decades ago, leaving behind a trail of rumors about his unconventional experiments. Some claimed he had been working on advanced robotics, while others whispered about energy weapons and time manipulation. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Mercer's disappearance and Kane's activities were connected. But how? And what role did the girl play in all of this? As Sarah combed through old newspaper articles and police reports, she stumbled upon a name that sent a chill down her spine: Alexia Mercer. The girl's name was listed in a report about a custody battle between Dr. Mercer and his estranged wife. The report was dated 10 years ago, the same year Mercer vanished. "Alex," Sarah murmured, the pieces clicking into place. Could the girl in the garage be Alexia Mercer, the daughter of the missing scientist? And if so, what was she doing with Kane? Back at the garage, Alex was putting the finishing touches on the device. The faint hum of electricity filled the air as the components began to glow, casting an otherworldly light over the room. Kane watched in silence, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. "Is it ready?" he asked. Alex nodded, wiping a bee of sweat from her forehead. "Almost. I just need to calibrate the—" A loud knock on the garage door cut her off. Both Alex and Kane froze, their eyes locking in a moment of shared panic. "Kane," a voice called from outside. "Open up. We need to talk." Kane's face darkened as he recognized the voice. He motioned for Alex to stay quiet and approached the door cautiously. When he opened it, a man in a trench coat stood on the threshold, his face partially obscured by the brim of his hat. "What do you want, Bennett?" Kane asked, his voice laced with irritation. Bennett smirked, his eyes darting past Kane to the interior of the garage. "Heard you've been busy. Thought I'd stop by and see for myself." "You're trespassing," Kane said, stepping forward to block the man's view. "Leave." But Bennett didn't budge. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "You might want to take a look at this." Kane snatched the paper and unfolded it, his eyes narrowing as he read. Helen, still hidden nearby, strained to see what was written but couldn't make it out. After a long moment, Kane crumpled the paper in his fist. "You've made your point," he said through gritted teeth. "Now get out." Bennett chuckled and tipped his hat. "Pleasure doing business with you, Kane. I'll be in touch." As Bennett disappeared into the rain, Kane closed the door and leaned against it, his shoulders sagging with a weariness Helen hadn't seen before. Alex approached him cautiously, her eyes wide with worry. "What did he want?" she asked. Kane shook his head. "Nothing we can't handle." But as he looked at the glowing device on the table, his expression betrayed the truth. Whatever Bennett had brought, it was clear that their time was running out. Shadows close in. The next morning, the storm had dissipated, leaving a veil of mist over Westbury Hills. Helen Parker stared out her kitchen window, her unease growing stronger with every passing moment. She replayed the events of the previous night, trying to make sense of what she had witnessed. The strange device, the tense interaction between Kane and the mysterious man, and the girl's quiet determination. All of it seemed to point to something far larger than Helen could comprehend. She wasn't alone in her thoughts. Sarah Bishop, now armed with the name Alexia Mercer, delved deeper into her investigation. The deeper she dug, the more unsettling the picture became. Alexia's father, Dr. Elliot Mercer, had been one of the leading minds in advanced energy systems, a field often dismissed as science fiction. His disappearance, coupled with Alexia's custody battle, suggested something far more sinister than an ordinary family dispute. But it was an article buried in an obscure tech journal that stopped Sarah cold. The article detailed Mercer's last known project, a prototype energy device rumored to have the potential to disrupt matter itself. Nicknamed the Catalyst, the device was deemed dangerous and its development halted, or so the article claimed. Sarah's hands trembled as she closed the article. If Kane and Alexia were in possession of the Catalyst, it wasn't just their lives at risk. It could endanger everyone in the vicinity. At the garage, Alex and Kane worked in silence. The tension between them was palpable, but neither spoke of the visitor from the night before. Alex focused on the device in front of her, her fingers moving deftly as she made final adjustments. The soft hum of the machine filled the room, a sound both ominous and mesmerizing. Kane paced behind her, his mind racing. Bennett's arrival had been a stark reminder that they were running out of time. He glanced at Alex, his chest tightening with a mix of pride and fear. She was brilliant, far beyond her years, but she was still a child. He couldn't shake the guilt of having dragged her into this. "Alex," he said finally, his voice breaking the silence. "You need to understand something. If this doesn't work—" "It will work," she interrupted, her voice firm. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "If it doesn't, you need to have a backup plan. Somewhere to go, someone to trust." Alex set down her tools and turned to face him. "I trust you, Mr. Kane. You're the only one who ever believed me." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. Kane nodded, unable to meet her gaze. He returned to pacing, his thoughts interrupted by the distant sound of a car engine. Outside, Helen had returned to her post, this time with a camera. She had decided that if she couldn't figure out what was happening, she would document it. Her curiosity had morphed into something closer to obsession, and she was determined to uncover the truth. She crouched behind a cluster of bushes, her camera lens trained on the garage. Through the mist, she saw a dark SUV pull into the driveway. The vehicle was sleek and unmarked, its windows tinted so dark that Helen couldn't see who was inside. The SUV came to a stop, and two men in suits stepped out. They moved with precision, their movements too calculated to belong to ordinary civilians. One carried a briefcase, the other a device that looked suspiciously like a scanner. Helen's breath caught as the two men approached the garage. They didn't knock. Instead, the one with the scanner began waving it over the door, while the other opened the briefcase to reveal a series of small tools. "They're breaking in," Helen whispered to herself, her heart pounding. She clicked the shutter on her camera, capturing every moment. Inside the garage, Alex froze as the hum of the machine shifted. "Something's wrong," she said, her eyes darting to the monitors. "The calibration. There's interference." Kane rushed to her side, his eyes scanning the data. "It's not interference. Someone's outside." Alex's face paled. "What do we do?" Kane grabbed her by the shoulders, his voice calm but firm. "You hide. Now." "But go," he barked, pointing toward a hidden panel in the wall. Reluctantly, Alex obeyed, disappearing behind the panel just as the garage door began to creak open. The two men stepped inside, their eyes immediately locking on Kane. The one with the briefcase smirked, his demeanor cold and calculating. "Mr. Kane," he said, his tone dripping with false politeness, "we've been looking for you." Kane didn't flinch. "I have nothing to say to you." The man with the scanner stepped forward, his device emitting a series of beeps as he waved it over the machine. "This is impressive work," he said. "Dr. Mercer would be proud." Kane's fists clenched at the mention of Mercer. "Leave. Now." The man with the briefcase chuckled. "You know we can't do that. The catalyst belongs to us. Hand it over, and we'll pretend this little escapade never happened." "It doesn't belong to you," Kane snapped. "It belongs to Alex." The men exchanged a glance, their smiles fading. "Alexia Mercer is a minor," the man with the scanner said. "She doesn't have the authority to make that decision. And frankly, neither do you." Kane took a step forward, his posture defiant. "You'll have to kill me before I let you take it." The man with the briefcase shrugged. "If that's what it takes." Before Kane could react, the man with the scanner pulled a device from his belt and pressed a button. The machine in the garage let out a high-pitched whine, its glow intensifying as sparks flew from its core. "No," Kane shouted, lunging forward, but the men were faster. They restrained him, forcing him to watch as the machine began to overload. Hidden behind the panel, Alex could barely breathe. She watched through a small crack as the men sabotaged her work, her mind racing. She had to do something. But what? She glanced at the tool she had hidden in her pocket, a small handheld device she had been working on in secret. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "You're stronger than you think." Summoning every ounce of courage, Alex stepped out of her hiding spot, her device clutched tightly in her hands. "Let him go," she said, her voice trembling but loud enough to command attention. The men turned, their eyes narrowing as they saw her. The man with the briefcase smirked. "Well, if it isn't the prodigy herself." "Let him go," Alex repeated, her thumb hovering over the button on her device. The man with the scanner laughed. "And what are you going to do, little girl? Build us a—" Before he could finish, Alex pressed the button. A pulse of energy erupted from her device, sending the men staggering backward. Kane took the opportunity to break free, grabbing the scanner and smashing it against the ground. The garage filled with chaos as Alex and Kane worked together to disable the intruders. By the time it was over, the men lay unconscious, and the machine was stable once more. Kane turned to Alex, his eyes wide with shock and admiration. "Where did you learn to do that?" Alex shrugged, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Dad taught me." As the two caught their breath, neither noticed the faint red dot blinking on the scanner, the signal it had sent out before being destroyed. The catalyst unleashed. The storm had passed, but the air over Westbury Hills remained heavy with tension. For Helen Parker, who had witnessed the chaos from her hidden vantage point, it felt as though she had stumbled into a world she couldn't comprehend. The mysterious men in suits, Alex's sudden courage, and the strange burst of energy. Everything pointed to something far bigger than a small suburban garage. Helen wasn't the only one reeling. Sarah Bishop, who had been poring over the fragmented history of Dr. Elliot Mercer and the catalyst, had reached a chilling conclusion. If her research was correct, the device wasn't just an invention. It was a breakthrough that could reshape reality itself. But in the wrong hands, it could also become the most devastating weapon the world had ever known. At the garage, the aftermath of the intrusion had left Alex and Kane scrambling to regroup. The unconscious men lay bound with electrical cords in the corner, their briefcase and scanner dismantled and scattered across the floor. The machine at the center of the room, the catalyst, hummed softly, its core glowing a faint blue. "We need to move it," Alex said, her voice trembling with urgency. "If they found us once, they'll find us again." Kane rubbed his temples, his mind racing. "It's not that simple. The catalyst isn't just a machine. It's tethered to this place. Moving it could destabilize everything." Alex's eyes widened. "Destabilize how?" Kane hesitated. "Your father designed it to interface with localized energy fields. It draws from the environment, anchoring itself. If we move it without the proper protocols, it could trigger an uncontrolled reaction." Alex clenched her fists. "We don't have a choice. They'll send more people. And next time, we might not be so lucky." Kane nodded grimly. "Then we'll have to finish what your father started. Tonight." Meanwhile, in a sleek, high-rise office miles away, the blinking red dot on a monitor alerted a team of operatives to the events at the garage. The signal, sent just before the scanner was destroyed, had revealed the catalyst's location. At the head of the team sat Victoria Grant, the enigmatic CEO of Zenith Industries, a company rumored to have ties to everything from military contracts to cutting-edge technology. Victoria stared at the monitor, her icy gaze unflinching. "Prepare the extraction team," she ordered, "and bring me Mercer's daughter alive." Her assistant, a wiry man with glasses perched on his nose, hesitated. "Ma'am, if the device is active." "It doesn't matter," Victoria snapped. "The catalyst is the key to everything. If it's active, we'll use it. If it's unstable, we'll contain it. Either way, I want it." Back in Westbury Hills, Helen's curiosity had finally overcome her fear. She couldn't sit idly by while something so clearly dangerous unfolded in her neighborhood. Clutching her phone, she dialed Sarah Bishop. "You won't believe what I saw last night," Helen said, her voice trembling. She described the men in suits, the confrontation, and the burst of energy she'd witnessed. Sarah listened intently, her journalist instincts kicking into high gear. "Helen, I think I know what's going on, but I need to confirm something. Can you meet me at the garage?" Helen hesitated. "Isn't that dangerous?" "It is," Sarah admitted. "But if we don't figure this out, it could be even more dangerous for everyone in this town." Reluctantly, Helen agreed. She grabbed her camera and a flashlight, bracing herself for whatever they might find. At the garage, Alex and Kane worked tirelessly. Alex's hands moved with precision as she adjusted the machine's settings, her father's notes spread out before her. Kane monitored the security feed, watching for any signs of another intrusion. "What happens if we succeed?" Alex asked, breaking the silence. Kane glanced at her. "We stabilize the core, contain the energy, and deactivate the catalyst. After that, it's up to you." Alex frowned. "What do you mean?" Kane sighed. "You're the only one who understands this technology. Your father's work. It's revolutionary, but it's also dangerous. If we deactivate it, you'll have to decide what happens next. Do you rebuild it? Destroy it? Hide it?" Alex's expression hardened. "I won't let it fall into the wrong hands. Ever." Before Kane could respond, the security monitor flickered. A convoy of black SUVs was approaching the garage. "They're here," Kane said, his voice low. "Get ready." Outside, Sarah and Helen arrived just in time to see the SUVs pulling into the driveway. They ducked behind a nearby fence, watching as a dozen armed operatives emerged from the vehicles. At their center stood Victoria Grant, her commanding presence unmistakable. "This is it," Sarah whispered, her pulse racing. "We have to warn them." Helen grabbed her arm. "How?" "They'll see us." But Sarah had already made up her mind. She darted across the street, waving her arms as she approached the garage. "Kane, Alex, they're coming." The operatives shouted in alarm, their weapons trained on Sarah. But before they could fire, the garage door burst open. Kane stood in the doorway, holding a handheld device that emitted a sharp, blinding light. The operatives stumbled back, disoriented. "Get inside," Kane shouted at Sarah. She didn't hesitate. Sprinting past the stunned operatives, she joined Alex and Kane inside the garage. Helen, still frozen behind the fence, watched in awe as the scene unfolded. Inside, the tension was palpable. The catalyst's glow had intensified, its core pulsing with an almost hypnotic rhythm. Alex was frantic, her hands flying across the controls as she tried to stabilize the energy output. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice trembling. "If they interfere, the core could overload." Kane grabbed a set of tools and joined her. "Then we finish this now." Outside, Victoria Grant recovered quickly. "Breach the garage," she ordered, "and bring me the device intact." The operatives moved in formation, their weapons raised as they approached the garage. But just as they reached the door, a wave of energy erupted from the catalyst, sending them sprawling. The ground trembled, and a crackling sound filled the air. Inside, Alex and Kane struggled to contain the machine. The controls sparked wildly, and the glow from the core was almost blinding. "It's going critical," Alex shouted. "I can't stop it." Kane grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to focus. "You can. You're the only one who can." Tears streamed down Alex's face as she turned back to the machine. She adjusted the settings, her hand steady despite the chaos around her. Slowly, the glow began to dim, the tremors subsiding. Outside, the operatives regrouped, their determination unwavering. Victoria stepped forward, her eyes locked on the garage. "Get ready," she said, a chilling smile on her lips. "This is far from over." The final resonance. The garage was a storm of sound and light, the catalyst pulsating with an energy that felt alive. Inside, Alex worked furiously, her small hands navigating the chaotic controls. Kane stood behind her, his body a shield between her and the chaos brewing outside. Sarah leaned against the wall, clutching a wrench she picked up from the cluttered floor, as if it could somehow protect her. "This isn't just science," Alex muttered, her voice a mix of frustration and awe. "It's alive. Dad always said the catalyst would adapt, but I didn't think it'd fight back." "Fight back?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Are you saying this thing has a mind of its own?" "Not a mind," Alex corrected, sweat dripping down her brow. "But it responds to interference. It's designed to stabilize energy fields, but if it's attacked, like those guys did, it amplifies its output instead. Can we shut it down or not?" Kane's voice was sharp, his eyes darting to the security feed where the operatives outside were regrouping. Alex hesitated, her fingers pausing over the control panel. "We can, but it'll take time. And if they hit it again before I finish." The unspoken conclusion hung in the air. If the catalyst destabilized entirely, the resulting explosion wouldn't just destroy the garage. It could level the entire neighborhood. Outside, Victoria Grant assessed her operatives with an air of cold precision. The wave of energy that had knocked them back was a minor inconvenience. Her lips curled into a faint smile as she observed the glowing seams of the garage, evidence of the powerhouse within. "Prepare the disruptor," she ordered, turning to the man beside her. "But ma'am, if we use it," the man began, only to falter under Victoria's icy glare. "I know what I'm doing," she snapped. "The catalyst is a prototype. We've studied the schematics. The disruptor will force it into a dormant state long enough for us to extract it." "And the girl?" he asked hesitantly. Victoria's smile widened, cruel and calculating. "She's the key. Bring her to me." Inside the garage, Alex felt the shift before the alarm sounded. Her heart sank as the monitors lit up with erratic readings. "They're using the disruptor," she said, panic creeping into her voice. "It's scrambling the core." Kane's jaw tightened. "What does that mean?" "It means if they keep this up, the core will collapse. Fast." "Can you counter it?" Sarah asked, gripping her wrench tighter. Alex nodded slowly, her mind racing. "I need to synchronize the stabilizer. It's risky, but it might work." "Do it," Kane said firmly. As Alex returned to the controls, Kane and Sarah moved to barricade the doors. The pounding of boots outside grew louder, the operatives preparing to breach. Helen, still hiding outside, watched in terror as the scene unfolded. She couldn't leave, not when something so monumental was happening. Clutching her phone, she began recording. Victoria's disruptor emitted a low hum, its energy field pressing against the garage like an invisible hand. The walls trembled, and inside, the catalyst flared brighter, resisting the forced dormancy. Alex gritted her teeth, her fingers dancing across the console as she worked to stabilize the core. "This is like trying to put out a fire with gasoline," she muttered. "You've got this," Kane said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Focus." Sarah glanced at him, then at Alex. "What if they breach before she's done?" Kane's face hardened. "Then we buy her time." As if on cue, the pounding on the garage door grew more insistent. The metal creaked, and a loud crash signaled the operatives had begun their assault. Kane grabbed a crowbar, standing ready by the door. Sarah joined him, her hands shaking but determined. The first operative forced his way inside, weapon drawn. Kane reacted instantly, swinging the crowbar and knocking the man to the ground. Another followed, only to be met with a sharp blow from Sarah's wrench. The tight confines of the garage worked in their favor, forcing the operatives to engage one at a time. Outside, Victoria watched with growing frustration. "Enough," she barked. "Send in the drones." A pair of sleek, black drones rose from the back of one of the SUVs, their rotors slicing through the air. Equipped with energy disruptors, they hovered toward the garage, their glowing sensors trained on the structure. Helen gasped, her phone capturing the drones as they unleashed concentrated beams of energy at the garage. The walls trembled violently, and the catalyst let out a piercing whine that made Helen's ears ring. Inside, Alex screamed as the energy levels spiked. "I can't hold it. The core is destabilizing." Kane turned, his face pale. "What happens if it collapses?" "It'll implode," Alex said, tears streaming down her face. "And then explode. Everything within a mile will be gone." Kane and Sarah exchanged a grim look. "We can't let that happen," Kane said. "Is there any other way?" Alex hesitated, then nodded. "There's an emergency protocol. Dad built it as a last resort. It'll force the core to collapse inward, but contained, like a black hole. It'll destroy the garage and everything inside, but it'll save the town." Kane placed a hand on her shoulder. "Do it." Alex's eyes widened. "But—" "Do it," he repeated, his voice soft but firm. "You've done more than anyone could ask. We'll protect you." Alex nodded, her hands trembling as she activated the emergency protocol. The catalyst's glow shifted, the blue light deepening to a fiery orange. The hum grew louder, a steady crescendo that drowned out all other sound. Outside, Victoria's operatives faltered as the garage began to collapse inward, the energy field pulling debris into itself. "What's happening?" she demanded, her composure slipping for the first time. "It's a containment collapse," one of her men said. "We need to retreat." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "No, get the girl." But it was too late. The catalyst reached critical mass, the fiery orange light consuming the garage in a final, brilliant flash. The operatives and drones were thrown back, and Victoria shielded her eyes as the ground shook beneath her feet. When the light faded, the garage was gone, replaced by a smoldering crater. The catalyst had disappeared, taking its secrets with it. Helen, still recording from a safe distance, lowered her phone as silence fell over the neighborhood. She couldn't believe what she had just witnessed. In the distance, she saw movement. From the edge of the crater, Kane emerged, carrying Alex in his arms. Sarah followed close behind, her face streaked with soot but determined. They had survived. In the aftermath, Kane, Alex, and Sarah disappeared, leaving Westbury Hills to wonder what had happened. Helen uploaded her footage anonymously, and the world watched in awe as the story of the catalyst spread. But for Alex, her journey was just beginning. As she and Kane drove into the horizon, she clutched a small device in her hands, a piece of the catalyst she had managed to save. Her father's legacy lived on, and she vowed to use it wisely. The shadows might have closed in, but Alex had emerged stronger, ready to forge her own path.